What's cracking? Big dogs. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the headquarters. My name is Nicholas. This is BDGE. And welcome back to another edition of Sophie Seconds. Okay, where we're breaking down the entire sophomore class. Each week, we're taking a running back, we're taking a wide receiver from the sophomore class, and we're breaking them down for 2021 fantasy football. The order of this list is based on their ADP, so their average draft position. So in week one of Sophie Seconds, we broke down Jonathan Taylor and Justin Jefferson, right? The wide receiver one and the RB1 in their respective ADP rankings for the class. And we've done that for the last 5 or 6 weeks. This is week number 6, I believe. And today's Sophie Seconds episode features J.K. Dobbins and Jeudy. A lot of J's being thrown up, right? Throw your J's up. Shout out to Hanukkah. I'll tell you what, yesterday was the Pride Parade in New York City, bro. And good Lord. I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen the electricity in the air like yesterday. You know, I've been to the Santa Cons, I've been to the Leprechauns, I've been to the cons, right? We're a bunch of fucking con artists here in New York. But the Pride Parade yesterday was something else, man. It was fucking crazy. Washington Square Park, people jumping in the fountain. There was like everybody, the entire city was taking a bath in the fountain. We're going to make a video soon, 24 hours at Washington Square Park, and I'm really fucking excited about it. Anyways, sorry. I'm just letting you know that if you guys are worried about like my heart stopping during this video, that's definitely an actual concern. So don't worry, we're going to try to make it through for you. But we're breaking down J.K. Dobbins. We're breaking down Jeudy for 2021 fantasy football. And then next week's, I guess, like the sophomore class, it really doesn't stop. We still got to hit James Robinson. We got to hit Zach Moss. Yeah, there's some other guys we can hit. Cool. That being said, I'm ready to go. If you guys have missed any of the other episodes, make sure you go watch them first. They'll be linked in the description. While you're down there, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the button that looks like that, aka the thumbs up button, and we shall get rolling. So let's tuck our shirts in. Let's stop yelling, and let's eat. J.K. Dobbins, the electric, exciting, efficient, all of the E's, was fantastic down the stretch for the Ravens last year. But the fantasy community has gotten sharper, and thus his ADP continues to fall down the board. Right now, I believe he's going as the RB17, pick 31 overall. So you're talking about in the second half of the third round. And you're thinking to yourself like, oh, J.K. Dobbins has RB1 upside, top 12, top 10, top 8 upside. The rush offense is really good. He's now the starting running back, all that stuff. I'm going to get him as my third pick. This is exciting. And I get it, right? We're going to break down the pros. We're going to break down the cons. Again, a bunch of fucking con artists here. We're going to spend a lot of time on the cons. I honestly should have just brought a mic and interviewed people at Washington Square Park yesterday. Been like, you're a con. What's the best fucking con you pulled off? And what's a con about J.K. Dobbins? We would have had a phenomenal episode. Would have been the best fantasy content that you've seen on the internet thus far. But there are pros. J.K. Dobbins, simply as I said, is the starting running back for one of the best run offenses that there will be in the NFL this year, that we've seen for the last couple years in the NFL. And that's baseline floor right there. You don't need to know much else to know that J.K. Dobbins will be a good piece for your fantasy team just because he's a starting running back in an offense that scores a lot of touchdowns on the ground, that moves the ball efficiently, that gives the running back a ton of touches. The problem with a guy like J.K. Dobbins is the ceiling begins to lower itself when they re-sign a guy like Gus Edwards, who is now on the team for a couple another years. I think it was a great signing for the team, right? We all wanted J.K. Dobbins to hit his ceiling in fantasy football. However, that's going to be tough to do on his rookie contract now that Gus Edwards is signed through 2022, I believe. I think it was a 2-year extension. The way I'm looking at Dobbins is this, and I've said this before in the last few videos. If Mark Ingram could do what he did in 2019 in this offense, there's no reason J.K. Dobbins can't post those same numbers, right? Mark Ingram scored a fuckload of touchdowns, 15 touchdowns, 5 of them receiving, so it's not numbers that you can depend on. But he was really efficient. Over 5 yards per carry, scored 15 touchdowns, basically was touching the ball between 12 and 15 times a game. Didn't get a ton in the receiving game. I think he had like 30 targets, 25 catches in that stratosphere. On a per game basis, that's like 1.5 targets a game. But he got a good enough rushing work, and in an offense like that, when you're getting enough volume, you just need a little bit of volume in an offense that the volume becomes very valuable, right? If you're getting enough volume, you're on the goal line sometimes, you're doing this, you're doing that, or whatever. It starts to become a big part of it, right? Like, you can get a lot of volume on a shitty team like Joe Mixon. What does that equate to? You're not catching passes. You're not getting goal line work. With Mark Ingram, he proved that in this offense, any type of volume can do wonders for you, okay? I expect Dobbins to be very involved on the goal line like Mark Ingram was. Where Mark Ingram finished, I believe, is like the RB7 or 8. Obviously, again, a lot of luck there, but that's not out of the range of outcomes for a guy like Dobbins that you're getting midway through the third round, right? 10, 12, 15 touchdowns is certainly going to be there. And he's going to be really, really, really efficient on the ground because he was one of the most efficient running backs on the ground last year. And you just look at what this offense has done behind Lamar Jackson. Every running back that runs behind him, right? Lamar Jackson, it's Mark Ingram, it's Gus Edwards, it's J.K. Dobbins. It don't fucking matter. You're over 5 yards per carry. And you think of the goal line back, right? And you think of Gus Edwards. You might think, oh, he's a little bit bigger than Dobbins. He'll get the goal line work. But over the second half of last year, Dobbins was actually the one getting the goal line work. He outcarried Gus second half of last year, 7-4 on the goal line. Gus scored 1 time on those 4 carries. J.K. Dobbins scored 6 times on those 7 carries. So when, we've talked a lot about the running back position over the last couple weeks, and one of the things I tend to make sure that you understand is that when you're drafting these running backs, you don't get taken away by their ceiling. It's not about what their ceiling can be or what their floor can be. It's about what is the likelihood that they hit both of those range in the spectrums, okay? Like, you could say J.K. Dobbins has a floor of RB18 and a ceiling of RB5, sure. But if you give him a 5% chance to hit RB5 and he has a 45% chance of finishing between RB16 and RB18, then picking him between RB16 and RB18 is not that great of a pick, okay? So that's the thing. Like, you're looking at Dobbins and you're looking at him as a floor play, right? He could get a lot of touchdown luck, as I kind of mentioned with Mark Ingram. You look over the last 2 seasons, with Lamar Jackson under center, running backs in Baltimore have scored 38 total touchdowns, which is, do the math, 19 per season. You split that up between Dobbins and Gus Edwards, who I think will get like 90% of the touches in this backfield, and you could see something like Dobbins scoring 11 or 12 times and Gus still getting in and having a nice year with like 7 or 8 touchdowns from the goal line. So, you're getting an offensive scores, 19 touchdowns on the ground between the running backs, and you could still have a nice little split where both guys don't have unrealistic ceilings, but they still have really nice floors. The problem, of course, like the reason Dobbins is a floor play and not a ceiling play is because Lamar just doesn't throw the ball to the running backs. And you look back at last year, like if you look at the numbers and you add up the targets that the running backs in Baltimore have gotten in 2019 and in 2020, and you take the combined target totals of those running backs and you compare them to single running backs around the NFL, and it gets ugly. You'll have like 2019, I think they had like 45 to 50 targets combined, the running back position, and there was like 20 running backs who had at least that many targets themselves. So it becomes a problem because, like, you look at the numbers last year, right? Dobbins broke out at the end of the year, right? Weeks 11 through 17, the last 6 weeks of the season, this guy scored 7 times in the 6-week span. You know how many targets he got in that 6-week span? 4. All right. That is the problem. Okay. In that 6-week span, he scored over 15 and a half PPR fantasy points 1 time. Okay, so you're talking about a streak where he scores 7 touchdowns in a span of 6 weeks, and he can only get over 15 and a half fantasy points 1 time. And it's like, yes, of course, you might be nitpicking with the fantasy points and the cutoff for it, but the case in point is this: like, yes, he finished between 11 and 15 fantasy points a bunch of times, but that's why we consider him a floor play, not a ceiling play. When you don't catch any passes, it does not allow you to pad your stats and slowly creep up to the 16, to the 18, to the 19 and a half, to the 21 fantasy points per game that we're looking for the upside, right? It's the same way when you don't get the pass catching work. It's the same reason we can't in good faith discuss Derrick Henry in the tier of C-Mac or Dalvin Cook, because on a points per game basis in PPR leagues, they're just not in the same tier. The more the pass catching matters, the further those guys fall off the cliff in terms of the advantage that you get at the high end of the position. So you can't discuss Derrick Henry with Dalvin Cook and C-Mac. You cannot start discussing Nick Chubb with the Saquon, the Kamara, even Zeke with the targets that he was getting with Dak under center last year. So, like, yes, they might be right there in rankings, but in terms of what they can give you in points per game, you just can't get them into that tier. And that's the way it's feeling with Dobbins a little bit, right? So until we see some upside in the pass catching game, and I'm not just going to magically assume it happens for no fucking reason just because you like J.K. Dobbins or they showed him catching a fucking pass on Twitter in practice or something like that. Until we actually see that become a part of Lamar Jackson's game, which I really don't expect it to be, it's going to be really hard to think of Dobbins as anything more than an upside play. So yes, you might be like, Dobbins is a great running back and no one's fucking arguing with you. You're literally just yelling at a wall at that point. The opportunity for fantasy is capped. And I think the 3rd round price is probably realistic. So it's like between J.K. Dobbins and between DeAndre Swift, it's probably good to mix it up between those two. Swift probably has a little bit more upside because he will catch passes. Like, even if Dobbins took over this entire backfield, we don't even know what the pass catching totals would be. He might still catch 35 passes this year, which is pretty numbing to the tongue when you say it out loud that way. But Swift's upside is, getting 280 carries and getting 80 targets or something this year. So it's an interesting dichotomy for these two sophomore running bikes. And if you want my breakdown on DeAndre Swift, I did it in last week's Sophie Seconds video. Let's move over to the wide receiver position. I do want to know what you guys are doing with Dobbins this year, though. So drop a comment down below. Are you targeting Dobbins in the third round? Are you still fading him just because he's a player that you don't want because you know he's not going to catch passes? What are you doing with Dobbins? Let me know in the comment section. Again, make sure you subscribe while you're down there. Make sure you hit the button that looks like this as well. Jeudy is a tough evaluation for fantasy this year because you just look back at the numbers. 113 targets in his rookie season. That is so wildly impressive. Like, if Bryan Edwards commanded 113 targets last year, he straight up might be like a second-round dynasty startup pick. Like, for no fucking reason. But if he did it, we'd be losing our shit. And if you look at those 113 targets, we went back to year 2000. Those were the 22nd most by a rookie. 22nd most by a rookie. And I don't really know what the fucking point of this chart was other than to say, like, obviously it's a very good list of players, obviously. I mean, there are some hits, there are some misses. Obviously, you got guys like fucking Eddie Royal. I don't know who the fuck Peter Warwick is. Maybe he was actually good in the second year. Yeah, you've got some hits, you got some misses, a lot of hits on there, obviously. I wanted to see, what the target change on average was for the following year. Minus 4.1 targets. I'm not really concerned about that. It's a whole different offense. It's whatever. It is whatever. Basically, when I look at Jerry Jeudy, I'm like, okay, he comes in as a rookie, commands 113 targets. It was kind of like the same point I was making with Chase Claypool, right? Chase Claypool came in, commanded 110 targets. That was impressive, but when you look at the raw numbers, Chase Claypool was actually only seeing a 16.5% target share in his offense. So yes, the raw numbers were there in volume, but because Pittsburgh passed the ball so fucking much, 16.5% target share was like 60th among wide receivers. So when I'm looking at Jeudy, I'm just like, okay, let's dive deeper into the numbers, because you can look at those numbers and you just say, let's not think too hard about this one. Let's say that this class was so good at the wide receiver position that we're overlooking Jerry Jeudy because he wasn't elite in terms of the outcome, but he was great in every other aspect of being a rookie wide receiver. His year would have been much bigger if Drew Lock can simply put a little bit more touch on his passes. When you look at Jerry Jeudy's year last year, he ranked 6th in the NFL in air yards. 6th, not 6th among rookies, 6th among all NFL wide receivers, but 2nd in unrealized air yards. And you know why that discrepancy was there? Because catchable target rate ranked 105th among wide receivers. Target quality rating, 102nd. Target accuracy, 107th. But you look at yards per reception, number 11 in the NFL. So when you just got the ball in his hands, when you actually threw it accurately and he caught the ball, yards per reception numbers were there. However, they didn't give him any fucking chance to catch the ball because, as you can see, he ranked outside of the top 100 in catchable target rate, target quality rating, target accuracy. You're saying to yourself, what the fuck is the difference between all these things? Well, you can go to playerprofiler.com, find out absolutely for free. The little I button next to each of the stats will tell you. It's more so just like the accuracy in terms of like the depth of target and things like that. There's a little bit of nuance to each one, but as you can see, there was no way the cookie crumbles in which it was a good thing by Drew Lock. This is a quote from Pro Football Focus. No receiver had a higher rate of their targets result in a quarterback fault incompletion this season than the rookie. The Alabama product also racked up the most targets on which he created separation that resulted in a quarterback fault incompletion. But according to Pro Football Focus, Jeudy only caught 76.5% of his catchable targets, the worst mark in the NFL. That's basically saying his quarterback play was absolutely abysmal, but he dropped a fuckload of balls. We know that he had a game with like 5 or 6 drops. Really poor trait to have when you were an NFL wide receiver. However, I did just see like a study come out. I think it was from Hayden Winks over at Underdog Fantasy, friend of the show, obviously. He looked at every statistic per wide receivers in fantasy and found correlations between which was the most important at predicting fantasy points per game the following year. Obviously, fantasy points per game in the previous year was the most predictive stat in terms of fantasy points per game in the following year. The next highest correlation was yards per game, right? We can't predict touchdowns. We have no idea if you're going to score 5 touchdowns or 15 touchdowns. So it makes sense that receiving yards per game is probably the most predictive thing. And he found out that, yes, that was the highest correlation. He found that drops had literally a negative correlation. I don't mean like negative as if you were X number of fantasy points this year and you had a shitload of drops, that means you're going to be negative next year. It literally means that there's no correlation between the number of drops you had in a year and the fantasy points per game in the following year. So drops do not fucking matter. He'll clean that up. I'm not worried about it. A couple more changes that we obviously have to factor in here. Sutton is coming back, and that's why you're like looking at the target numbers and you're thinking, wow, very impressive as a rookie, but there's this like hinge of hesitancy to me to whether or not those are real, because Sutton obviously missed the entire year. Does it cap his ceiling? probably as a 7th round pick right now where you're getting him. He is going off the board as the wide receiver 34, 76th overall. This is in reference to Jerry Jeudy. So you're getting him as a back-end wide receiver 3, and you're getting him in the 6th to 7th round. At that price, I'm not expecting wide receiver 1 numbers in fantasy football, but they're two drastically different players. And we do like players 2 years removed from the ACL, not 1 year removed like Courtland Sutton is going to be. But again, Sutton is young and it happened super early in the season. So I'm not as concerned with the rehab as long as we keep getting good reports. But it's very possible that we don't see a 100% healthy Courtland Sutton in 2021. It's possible that maybe we see a 70 to 80%, and then maybe like the last month of the season, we start to see 90, 100% Courtland Sutton. I'm just saying that's in the range of outcomes for what could possibly happen this year. But that leaves it open for Jerry Jeudy this year in redraft for sure. The other big change, of course, is that they bring in Teddy Bridgewater. We don't know what the fuck's going to happen at the quarterback position. Some people are still bought in on Drew Lock. I don't know what to think. I don't care. I'm not going to be the one to sit here. I've never been to a fucking Denver Broncos OTA or practice, so I'm not going to tell you who's going to be the starting quarterback this year. But if Teddy Bridgewater's under center, I like that a lot for Jeudy. Obviously, if Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson ends up coming to Denver, Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton are honestly first-round picks. I'll take both of them. If I'm at the 112, we're going Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton at the 112, 201. We're going Noah Fant, KJ Hamler at the 212 and 301. All right, or the 312, 4, whatever the fuck. I'm getting all the Broncos at every turn, right? There will be no turn in which a Denver Bronco is not being picked onto my lineup if Deshaun Watson ends up there. But if Teddy B ends up there, I will be taking a lot of Jerry Jeudy. When you look at what Teddy B did last year, he did exactly what we thought he was. Air yards per attempt, 28th amongst NFL quarterbacks. We know he's not throwing the ball downfield. Accuracy rating, number 1 in the NFL. Number motherfucking 1 in the NFL. Catchable pass rate, number 7 in the NFL. Deep ball completion percentage, number 13. Clean pocket completion percentage, number 7. Okay, Teddy B is exactly who we think he is. If you're giving him a short open pass, he's going to hit you. And what better attribute to have paired with Jerry Jeudy, who runs these quick routes, gets open because he's a great route runner, separation real quick. That's Teddy B, man. And I'm looking at Teddy B. I looked at some deeper numbers. I was looking at the real analytics here because you could do this on PFF now. Throws made between 0 and 9 yards. So between 0 and 9 yards of the line of scrimmage, right? You ain't getting that first down. That's check down Teddy for you. Completion rate, number 2 in the NFL behind only Aaron Rodgers, okay? So he completed 86.2% of his passes thrown between 0 and 9 yards. That adjusted completion percentage, which takes into account drops and takes into account throwaways, number 1 in the NFL. Yards per attempt, 7.8 yards per attempt on throws. That's actually wild. On throws between 0 and 9 yards, he averaged 8 yards per attempt. So every time he threw the ball between 0 and 9 yards, that factors into incompletion. That's just straight up passing attempts. Number 1 in the NFL, 7.8 yards. That lines up fantastically for a guy like Jerry Jeudy, who played in the slot 31.3% of the time. You have to wonder if that changes with Courtland Sutton bike, right? Because Sutton obviously is going to move outside. He's an outside wide receiver. He's an outside alpha kind of guy. You'd think that Jerry Judy's slot percentage, which again, 31%, last year, goes up. More slot snaps again would be good for Teddy because he likes those quick check down guys who get open quickly. And then if that's the case, Jerry Jeudy was good in the yak department, right? Top 20 last year, despite being top 20 in average depth of targets. So looking at a guy, I think things line up if Teddy Bridgewater is under center. And realistically, Jerry Jeudy, like, he's exactly what we thought he was coming out of Alabama. He's already cementing himself as one of the top route runners in the game. And this is per Matt Harmon's reception perception, success rate versus different types of coverage. Man, 87th percentile in terms of all of his historical receiving data charted in reception perception. You can get access to this stuff on receptionperception.com, one of the best resources in fantasy football, versus press coverage, 75th percentile. And this is percentile in terms of like all of the wide receivers he has charted historically. So you're talking about like Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, who have absolutely crushed this. So 87th percentile against man coverage last year. Those kind of numbers almost always lead to breakout years eventually. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year, but it's a pretty damn good chance if Teddy B is under center. I will definitely be buying shares of Jerry Jeudy at his price of wide receiver 34, 76th overall. I just traded for him in a dynasty league. We did a video on that a couple weeks back. I gave up Jerry Jeudy in a second. No, I gave up Laviska Shenault and a first for Jerry Jeudy and a second. So we swapped first and seconds, and then we swapped Jerry Jeudy and Laviska Shenault. I'm very high on Jerry Jeudy, so y'all should be too. Okay, that's all I got for y'all today. Make sure that if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you are new, we're doing breakdowns like this every single day. And comment, let me know what you guys are doing with J.K. Dobbins, with Jerry Jeudy. And I'll see y'all tomorrow. Wide receiver rankings, all of the wide receiver ones, top 12. We are breaking them down in one video. Goodbye. I love you.